The conspiracy theory that Nelson Mandela died in 1985 at the age of 67 has been circulating in South Africa for years. Rumors claim that Mandela, after his release, never spoke Xhosa, leading to the sudden discovery of videos showing him speaking the language. These allegations prompted the Nelson Mandela Foundation to issue a statement and release historical footage to debunk the claims. You would think South Africans would trust Mandela's foundation over these absurd stories. The conspiracy further explains why South Africans are encouraged to perform 67 minutes of charity on Mandela's birthday. According to the theory, after Mandela supposedly died in 1985, the apartheid government replaced him with an imposter named Gibson Makanda. In this video, I don't plan to debunk the conspiracy theory. Instead, I want to understand why some South Africans believe Nelly died in prison. It is believed that the war against apartheid was ruthless, with the military and paramilitary forces using wild dogs, tear gas, and other dangerous weapons. South Africans today cannot fully grasp how devastating apartheid was. For this reason, many people believe Nelson Mandela died in the conflict, and the apartheid government replaced him with a clone. The alleged clone, Gibson Makanda, reportedly resembled Mandela. According to these claims, he was taken to Pollsmoor prison in May 1985, where a few doctors from London performed minor surgery on him. From there, he was trained to speak and walk like Nelson Mandela. Some conspiracy theorists suggest that this deception contributed to Nelson and Winnie Mandela's divorce, as she could not recognize the man he had become. Gibson's biography is shrouded in mystery. While his place of birth is said to be South Africa, some allege he might be of Zimbabwean descent. Rumors place his birth in the early 1900s, making him 18 years older than Nelson Mandela. Beyond his birth year, little is known about his history, family, and background. This is the man who is purported to have negotiated the end of apartheid and became South Africa's first democratic president. The implication is that the man leading the African National Congress's negotiations with the National Party in the early 1990s was not a radical freedom fighter, but rather a puppet of his opposition. Although this conspiracy circulated for a while without gaining much traction, it resurfaced in 2019 when an image of a younger Mandela's face was put into a beauty enhancement application called FaceApp. I downloaded FaceApp and tried it out. Not much has changed since then. Interestingly, Johnny Clegg hinted at this theory in a song released in 1987, which roughly translates to, "We have not seen him." Key lyrics emphasize that they have not seen him where he is buried. These conspiracies claim that the reason for commemorating 67 minutes on Madiba's day is that he was 67 years old when he was killed in prison in 1985. Thus, many believe he died long before apartheid ended. This theory attempts to explain the persistent inequality in post-apartheid South Africa. The current South African political order, in terms of the constitution, governance system, and economic policy framework, bears the imprint of Mandela's generation. In essence, these conspiracy theories suggest that the real Mandela did not ultimately liberate South Africa. The truth about post-apartheid South Africa is that while the majority of black South Africans achieved emancipation, they did not attain true liberation. Here, liberation should mean more than just formal political equality. It should encompass the economic freedom and human flourishing promised by the 1955 Freedom Charter, which Mandela helped draft. The failure to deliver on this promise and the resulting widespread inequality across racial lines have led many to question what went wrong. To understand the ANC's abrupt shift in the 1990s from its radical beginnings, we must consider the global macroeconomic forces largely beyond the ANC's control, as well as its structural inability to discern and manage what was within its control. For instance, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union, capitalism became the dominant global economic structure. Key institutions like the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank which South Africa needed at the time, played a significant role. The apartheid government left the country economically destitute, with no documentation to help establish international relations or partnerships. While the National Party left infrastructure in privileged areas intact, the Mandela administration had to build the nation from scratch. But that's something that we can unpack in a future video about how the apartheid government bankrupted the country, leaving it with no international support and a dark legacy of human rights abuses. To implement proper trade liberalization and refashion the state to promote globalized free markets, the ANC had to think differently. By the 1970s, the Western social democracies the ANC hoped to emulate were outdated and in decline. At that time, the ANC needed to reintegrate into the global market because global finance capital dictated the rules of engagement. Mandela's decisions were based on his assessment of what was politically feasible at the time. This is why South Africans remain divided about their first democratic president. Depending on whom you ask, Mandela is either fondly remembered as a hero of liberation or criticized as a sellout. Labeling Mandela as a sellout is a flawed perspective, as it wrongly assumes he was flawless when he was never perfect. It's also important to remember that he did not make these decisions alone, nor was he as individually powerful as many believe. These discussions became more urgent when the ANC entered a government of national unity in 2024 and even back in 1994. Ultimately, the ANC's actions reflect a stark contrast between the organization it once was and what it is today. These actions fuel the persistence of conspiracy theories about Nelson Mandela,